film. And I have seen every single Walt Disney animation feature film. That's 59 movies, from Snow White to Raya. And since I've seen Disney animation change and grow throughout nearly an entire century, I thought it would be fun to rank all of the decades of Disney movies. To make sure that this video doesn't get too convoluted, I'm going to keep it to just the animated feature films. No Pixar, no live actions, no direct-to-video sequels, no weird forgotten animated movies that are technically from like a sub-studio that aren't as good and no one really remembers that much, and we all just kind of try to forget that they actually happened. Now before we begin, just want to preface this all with the disclaimer: this is my personal ranking. Feel free to love the decades that you love, hate the decades that you hate. We may be getting a little controversial. Not to sound like a clickbait article, but this list may surprise you, because it surprised me. So prior to going into my great movie watch, I thought that there was going to be a particular decade that I hated more than any of the others, and it's actually not so bad on my list. So for this list purposes, since Snow White's kind of an outlier, because obviously Disney had other shorts and animated projects in the 30s, but again, we're just dealing with feature films. She was the first, so she kind of is alone in the 30s. So I'm just going to throw her into the 40s. And then similarly, Raya, at the moment of filming this in September of 2021, she's been the only one in the 20s. I'll count her with the 2010s, just so she's not left out, because I don't want anybody to be left out. With all that being said, let's get started. So, coming in at number 8, last and in this case least, the 1940s, and also Snow White. Now for any Disney traditionalists or classic diehards, this might be shocking, because this is what's referred to as the golden age of Disney animation. This was, the group that started it all. This decade consists of Snow White, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi, and then all the package films. This decade was certainly historic and groundbreaking, doing new things that literally hadn't been seen before. So again, this is where it comes down just completely to different tastes. I wasn't the biggest fan of any of the package films. I like a plot, I like a story that I can follow, and I 100% understand why they had to do the package films. If you don't know, it was because of the war going on, so they had limited resources and limited people. So totally understand it, but that doesn't mean I like the movies. I really enjoyed Snow White. I really enjoyed Bambi. Really didn't like Dumbo. Really didn't like Pinocchio. Fantasia was interesting. And then again, all the package films are just okay. They're just a bunch of little shorts, so it was hard to really connect with any of them. So sorry to these classics. I think the positive view to take on it is that Disney grew as it went on. Nobody's perfect right out the gate. Not even Disney. The next decade on the list, coming in at number 7, is the 1970s. Walt Disney Animation Studios were not feeling super groovy going into the 70s. Unfortunately, their great leader, Walt Disney, had passed away at the end of the 60s. This was the first decade of what's now considered the Disney Dark Ages. The 70s actually only had 4 movies: The Aristocats, Robin Hood, Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and The Rescuers. I ranked this second to last because I really didn't love any of these films. The Aristocats was actually one of my least favorites out of the 59. I'm sorry, I cannot root for this old lady who is very rich and is gonna leave all her money not to orphans, not to the sick, not to people who need homes, not to any charity, her cats. She's leaving millions of dollars to cats. They're really annoying cats too. Robin Hood I enjoyed. It was probably the one I liked the most out of this decade. Steal from the rich. Go steal from that cat lady, Robin. Because she definitely don't need that money. Winnie the Pooh's cute. It's fine. And then The Rescuers. I actually enjoyed the movie, but could not stand the Rescuers themselves. Go watch that movie again if you haven't seen it in a while. They don't do any rescuing. They just happen to be in the bayou at the right time. The Moonshine Mouse is probably the real hero of that story. Later decades, I think, just offered more, offered better. That's why the 70s is going to stay the number 7 spot. Coming in at number 6, the 2000s. I said earlier that there was a particular decade I thought was going to be ranked last on this list, and this was it. I thought I was going to hate the 2000s out of any other decades, but it made it towards the middle, so yay, 2000s. This might be a little controversial. I know that there are people, especially in my age group, because these were the movies of our childhoods. People have real nostalgia connections to it, and I respect that. I get that. It doesn't change that they're not the best plotted or developed movies. I'm sorry, they're just not. So it's Fantasia 2000, which is just Fantasia but with nicer animation. So friends, if you're ever like in pub trivia or doing some kind of Disney quiz, beware of this trick question. You might get asked, what year did Fantasia 2000 premiere? And you're gonna want to say 2000. Technically it premiered in 1999. But it counts as a 2000s movie because that was just the premiere. It was then released to wide audiences in January of 2000. So it doesn't get to be part of the 90s. Dinosaur.
Terrible.
My least favorite movie in all 59. I don't know if you can have a mortal enemy with a movie, but if I could, that's mine. Emperor's New Groove, fine. Atlantis, really interesting concept. Wish they had spent more time in actual Atlantis. Lilo and Stitch, this is probably one of the more popular ones of this era. I love the sister storyline. I wish that was focused on more. I think I would like this movie a lot more if it did not have the other two stupid aliens. Like, it was just ridiculous and silly. We don't need it. Treasure Planet, interesting concept, obviously taken from Treasure Island. I literally just watched this not too long ago and I can't really remember much about it besides the animation was really impressive. Brother Bear, I think, is probably the best of these after Princess and the Frog. I think it has really important and interesting themes pertaining to humanity and man's relation to nature. The plot just really drags in the middle. Home on the Range was terrible. Chicken Little and Meet the Robinsons, they tried. Bolt frustrated me. It was just made for stunt casting. And then there's Princess and the Frog, which is wonderful and great. I think it says a lot that the biggest hit of this era was when they were like, we're gonna go back to what we were doing in the 90s. I give props to this decade because they definitely were trying some new things. We're thinking outside the box, trying more original ideas, which, was hit or miss. Were there any hits? I also think that they did diversity and representation really well in this decade, and I wish so dearly that these characters were in better movies. I think some people look back on this decade with rose-colored nostalgia glasses. Like, to be honest, even as a kid, I didn't really enjoy any of these movies, so I just don't understand it. I think they rely on cheap jokes more and more toilet humor, and I know there's gonna be people like,
it's a kid's movie, of course there's gonna be fart jokes.
And I'm gonna say no because I watched 80 years of kids movies, and the vast majority of them did not have fart jokes and were successful. They're very silly, and of course it's a kids movie. You want silly, you want funny, but you can do so while still being, I don't know if classy is the right word, but you can do so without being ridiculous. And a lot of these movies are ridiculous. Sorry, I cannot get on board with llama shenanigans. None of the 2000s movies are charming. Even when they have heart, they don't have charm. Like, I'm sorry, when critics and audiences and the finances are like on the same page. And you can call me pretentious in the comments. I know I'm a snob. There's nothing that you could say about me that I haven't thought about myself. There's no iconic songs. Like, name one truly iconic song, aside from Princess and the Frog. But, like, name an iconic song. And I guess not Fantasia either, because Fantasia actually uses, like, orchestras. You know what I mean. You know where I'm going with this. So 2000s, you got farther than I thought you would. But definitely not good enough to make the lower half of this list. Next up, coming in at number 5 is the 60s. The thing with the 60s is there's only 3 movies. There weren't really enough for me to dislike. The key thing with this list too is we're looking at the decades as a whole. Unfortunately, Princess and the Frog cannot save the 2000s. But on the flip side, I feel like the 60s couldn't be ranked lower or higher. I don't really know what the right thing to say is. It couldn't be in one of the better spots because there just wasn't enough there. That being said, what was there, I really genuinely liked. 101 Dalmatians, it was actually one of my favorites in the 59, especially if we're looking at pre-Renaissance movies. This is definitely up there. It's actually a really exciting story. Pongo and Perdita, and I say this without irony, are like the best Disney parent pair. Put respect on their names because their kids get taken. They're like, we're gonna traverse the British countryside in the middle of winter and bring our kids home. Most other Disney parents are just like, my kid is in danger and hasn't been home in days. Oh well. Sword in the Stone is really cute. I love A Story with Magic. Not one of my favorites, but again, I didn't dislike it. And then Jungle Book is just a classic. It was one of my favorites as a kid. I was happy to see that it was one that held up and that I also enjoyed watching as an adult. It's got a panther and a literal bear trying to raise and take care of this little boy in the jungle. It's got wing dancing, vultures that look like the Beatles but aren't actually the Beatles because the Beatles didn't want to do this movie, but they still have the haircuts. Really thrilling end sequence with the villain, scary villain. So I enjoyed the 60s. I went back and forth, I'm gonna be honest, between the 60s and the 2000s, switching their spots, but ultimately, because the 2000s had movies that I hated and the 60s didn't, that I had to rank it lower. So that brings us into the bottom half of this list. And these next four are the top decades of Disney animation, in my humble opinion. Coming in at number 4 is the 1980s. When I think of the 1980s, you know what I think about? Shoulder pads, big hair, colorful clothing, and Disney critical and financial distress. So this was the second decade of what is referred to as the Disney Dark Ages. So having this decade be as low on the list as it is might be a bit of a shocking and/or controversial ranking. So in this decade we had The Fox and the Hound, The Black Cauldron, Great Mouse Detective, Oliver and Company, and The Little Mermaid. While the greatness of Princess and the Frog could not lift up the weight of 12 other subpar movies before it, Little Mermaid only has 4 subpar movies to carry the weight of. So that's why the 80s gets a bit of more of a boost. Also, again, there's none in this decade that I hate or even dislike. They're either fine or I really like it. As a child of the 90s, loved Little Mermaid. It was one of my absolute favorites as a kid. And I also really enjoyed The Black Cauldron, which nearly shut down the studio. I probably shouldn't like it, but I do. It's exciting. It's got a villain that actually terrifies me, even as an adult. It's an adventure, quest, things that I love. Fox and the Hound, I didn't dislike it. I just think it's too sad. Why is there so much pain in that movie? Why do we need this? But in terms of a movie, I think it's good. Well, it's plotted well. I like that it has a more realistic ending. It's Great Mouse Detective is fine. Oliver and Company is fine. I think I put Oliver and Company above Great Mouse Detective because the dogs and the kitty are so cute and rats are not cute. If you don't understand Disney history, like Disney was going to stop making animated movies. Like they had the 70s and 80s, 2 decades now of not making any real hits. And so people were like, oh, you know, Disney's a has-been studio. And then Little Mermaid comes out and they're like, oh dang, they're capable of this greatness. Menken and Ashman's music and the lyrics, the score, the animation, it's so much fun. So 100% it gives a boost to this decade. It is what it is. My hands are tied. 80s has to be low. And you know what? The 80s proves that even the darkest of times, you're gonna have a light at the end of the tunnel. And even when you're at your lowest and you might be ready to give up, if you keep working hard, you'll have great success. That's such like a perfect Disney message. Alright, but enough of this sweet, sappy crap. We're moving on. We are now into the top 3. Coming in the 3rd spot is the 1950s. And I know some of you are thinking, Emerald, what? You're going back all the way to the 50s? You think the 50s is better than the 2000s? Yep, 100% I do. As I said before, the 40s were a rocky start. The 50s, in my eyes, is where Disney really becomes Disney, and I think that counts for something. We have Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, all considered classics. Maybe 5 2000s movies that are actually remembered fondly by mass audiences. Not just you and your cousins who would rewatch one of them at sleepovers. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm getting really defensive over comments that haven't even been made yet. Or may not ever be made. This might not be seen by that many people. I'm just playing defense early. I'm sorry. Let's take a breath. The 50s. Cinderella is probably my least favorite of the princess movies, but I cannot deny her impact. Cinderella is like the Disney princess movie. Walt Disney World's castle is Cinderella's castle. Cinderella gave us a dream is a wish your heart makes. It's one of like the biggest Disney songs. You hear it in the commercials and in the shows. She's probably on the most merchandise. She's like front of the pack. Whether I agree with it or not, I cannot deny that Cindy is the it girl of Disney animation. Alice in Wonderland, one of my favorites. It's so much fun, and Alice in Wonderland is proof that the 2000s didn't have to be what they were, because Alice in Wonderland is silly and it's whimsical and it has all these ridiculous things, but it does it in a way that's charming. Peter Pan certainly has its flaws. The scene with the Native American characters is terrible. If I'm looking at the movie as a whole, it's still very fun. It's got a classic villain. Wendy is a surprisingly strong female character. Lady and the Tramp has two of, in my eyes, the best Disney characters out of all 59 movies. And that is, of course, Tony and Joe, two restaurateurs who give Lady and the Tramp their spaghetti. Come on now. Icons. The song is iconic. The scene is iconic. They could have shooed the dogs away, but they gave them spaghetti for their date. How do you not love that? The Siamese cats are totally racist, though. Like, again, flaws galore. I'm not saying that none of these decades are perfect. I'm trying to look at the movies as a whole, the decades as a whole. And then Sleeping Beauty. The animation in Sleeping Beauty is definitely some of my favorites, especially in the 2D era. It's just so different. Each scene's like a painting in itself. And it has a freaking dragon. I can definitely see people disagreeing, and I can totally understand like the issues of the 50s dragging it down. But if we're looking in terms of quality of movie, I don't know, it's hard. Like, honestly, like, looking at the list, I'm like trying to figure out what to switch it with, but I don't think the 80s is better than the 50s. Like, those movies just weren't as good as the movies of the 50s. Yeah, I gotta keep it on number 3. Like, each of these movies has iconic music from it, iconic characters. I don't know how to rank it lower. I don't know where else I would put it on this list. I gotta keep it at number 3. Coming in the number 2 spot is the 2010s. This is known as the modern renaissance for a reason. The movies that are part of this are Tangled, Winnie the Pooh, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Moana, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and Frozen 2. Like I said before, I guess I'll throw in Raya because she's the only one of the 2020s at the moment. Tangled, one of my favorites. I'm biased. I have a Tangled mug, but I'm not drinking out of it. I am drinking out of a Frozen mug. Get it? Icebreaker. The 2010s show that you can have humor and silliness and still be classy and charming. The female characters of Frozen, Rapunzel, Moana, show you can be feminine and princessy and still kick butt. Zootopia is so well written and makes really important points about prejudice and stereotyping. It's such a genuinely good film and good mystery. Big Hero 6 shows that you can go outside the box and do something different and still be a hit. Baymax, one of the best characters. That like found family trope, all the characters coming together, really good. Diverse cast, all different people, all very smart, capable, and with different scientific interests. Frozen, I know we roll our eyes at it now. Well, I don't. It was a hit for a reason. The music is so good. It's fun. I love Moana, one of my favorite characters. The animation of the water in Moana, even Frozen 2, like, it looks real. It's so good. Like, looking where the animation grows from Tangled, which is a beautiful movie, but just the growth from that all the way to Frozen 2, it's amazing. Frozen to Frozen 2, like, the differences. Wreck-It Ralph is a great movie. Wreck-It Ralph 2, or Ralph Breaks the Internet. Not as great as a sequel, but it's fine. The Winnie the Pooh movies, very similar to the first, where it's kind of just a bunch of short stories together. It's cute, but it's nothing groundbreaking. But I think everything else, besides those two, are just wonderful. Honestly, I've gotten more into Disney in this decade. The decade of the 2000s, where I was an actual child, I was less into Disney. I would rent them from Blockbuster when they came out on VHS once and never have a desire to watch them again. And then we got into the 2010s and it was just great music again, great stories, iconic characters. Definitely could have used more representation in this decade, and I'm hoping now we're seeing a trend where that's changing. I mean, Moana, now we've had Raya, next coming up is Encanto. I'm hoping that we're going to see different cultures and different classic stories that aren't just European classic stories represented. And I'm hoping that we're just going to keep growing in the future. So with that, let's get into the number one spot. Coming in at the number one spot, the top decade of Disney animation, the 90s. Was there any other choice? I mean, it's the Renaissance. And it all started with everybody's favorite, The Rescuers Down Under. The reason why there was no feature film Disney sequels until Ralph Breaks the Internet. But then we got Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan. Like, if it was an album, there would be no skips. Great movie after great movie, iconic characters after iconic characters, absolute bangers after bangers between Menken and Elton John and Phil Collins. Come on, no other decade has ever done it like the 90s. I feel like this is the decade I should talk the most about, but I don't even know what to say that isn't already universally understood. Beauty and the Beast was nominated for Best Picture. Not Best Animated Picture, because they didn't have that category yet. Best Picture. It lost to Silence of the Lambs, which, understandable. But they thought it was good enough to be up against Silence of the Lambs. Aladdin, Robin Williams as the genie alone. Lion King, one of the best Disney's ever done. A story that's definitely adapted from Shakespeare and might be adapted from an anime, but is one of Disney's most beloved of all time. Pocahontas, I have my issues with the history of it. I think a lot of people do. So if I separate Pocahontas from history, and if I just look at it as a movie and that story, I think it has very important themes. I think Pocahontas is a really strong female character who has flaws and makes mistakes, but is just trying her best. Her grandma is a talking tree, which is just so baller. Hunchback is, in my opinion, the most underrated Disney film of all time. I get goosebumps every time I listen to The Bells of Notre Dame. The themes of that movie, I think, go over the heads of a lot of kids, but gosh, watch it again if you haven't in a while, because it's dealing with prejudice and greed, government corruption, religious corruption. Like, it's a lot of heavy stuff in there, balanced out by silly gargoyle shenanigans. To be completely fair to the 2000s, I'm not a fan of the silly gargoyle shenanigans. I'm just not a fan of silly shenanigans. And here I am making a video about kids' movies. Duality of man. I don't know what to tell you. Hercules, maybe my favorite soundtrack of all time. It's so hard. Zero to Hero, I think, is my favorite Disney song of all time. It's just so fun. I love the twist. Love interest is working with the villain. Hades is so funny. Hercules is a great hero. Danny DeVito's in it. I love Hercules so much. And then Mulan! Oh, I'm getting so happy just thinking about these movies. I'll Make a Man Out of You. I already said Zero to Hero is my favorite song. So I'll Make a Man Out of You is my second favorite song. I don't know. Maybe they just battle it out in my heart for number one favorite. Total girl power movie. Mulan kicks butt. Eddie Murphy as Mushu is hilarious. And then Tarzan. I mean, come on. I don't even need to tell you about how great that soundtrack is because there is loads and loads of memes about it. But it's also a story, again, not to sound like a broken record, but dealing with deep themes. Dealing with being an outsider, trying to find your place in the world, no matter how different we may look on the outside, like being connected on the inside. You can pick certain things here and there from all of them. Sure, you could do that with any of the 59 movies. But if you're looking at it overall, great characters, great stories, great music, fantastic decade. Am I biased because this was the decade I was born in and the movies that I was raised on in my formative years, and even once we got into the 2000s, the ones that I was rewatching the most? Yeah, sure, maybe. I could be looking back with nostalgia glasses, but also they're the movies I think everyone talks about the most. So that is my list. Share what you think your ranking of the decades is in the comments below. If it's totally different than mine, if it's the reverse of mine, that's wonderful. I want to know like why you love the movies and the decades of movies that you love. You might hate the 90s. I want to know why. I'm sure a lot of people will rank the 2000s lower. At the end of the day, these are movies. They're kids' movies. They're fun. I think it's just fun to talk about what brings us all joy. Share your ranking. Let me know what you think of mine. I'm not going to promote arguing. I like a good debate. This is one of those things where nobody's wrong and nobody's right. It's just pure opinion. And I always love to talk about Disney movies, so let's do it. It's so interesting to me just to look at all of these movies, from Snow White to Raya, how much Disney has grown, changed in so many different facets. The animation styles, the writing, the music. And as I said before, I'm really excited to see what future decades are going to bring. Have a wonderful day. Let me know if you have any other suggestions for Disney content. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye! And I have seen every single movie. And I have seen every Disney feature film. Disney animation feature film. Okay, let's go.